Hey everybody. Today I'm just going to talk about The Last of Us and how it relates to morality. So, now, at the end of the game, there's a very important decision that Joel has to make. For those of you who haven't seen how the game ends yet and don't want to be spoiled, fair warning, spoilers. But, okay, so at the end of the game, Joel takes Ellie from the doctors who are about to cut her up and examine her to try and find a cure for the fungal pathogen. So he bursts in, kills all these fireflies, and takes her away. She's unconscious at this point, and obviously when she comes to, he lies to her and tells her that they've stopped looking for a cure. Now, there's been a lot of debate amongst fans of this game as to whether or not Joel actually did the right thing. Obviously, on one hand, he saved Ellie's life, and he did so out of love for her. For him, it seems to be that it's not worth saving humanity if he has to give up his humanity to do so. On the other hand, there's the issue that he's possibly screwing over a great many people, and he's also depriving Ellie of the ability to choose for herself. And I think part of the debate hinges on whether the needs of the many always outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. Is that always the case? I think many people would say yes, but I think the problem with that is if you take that to the logical extreme, you have this sort of society where martyrdom is always sort of encouraged. And, yeah, I think that's a problem. Because does that mean that any time more than one other person's life is at risk, that you are obligated to throw your life away for them? You know, when is it you're obligated to harm yourself? For my part, I would say never. I think that people have their rights to their own lives and their own bodies. They have bodily autonomy. We can certainly commend people for being heroic and risking personal injury to help others, but I do not think it should be demanded or obligated of them. Because again, for me, if we're all just sort of these beings that exist solely to protect other beings around us, what is the point of any of those lives, you know? And I should note here that I think that the situation is different if you're an ordinary person versus if you're a person who is in a position of power. Because I think when you put yourself in a position of power, through, say, becoming an elected official, you put the responsibility, you put the burden on yourself. You are essentially accepting the responsibility of making decisions for the greater good, and you really need, at that point, to put your own personal interests aside. But returning for a moment to the idea of the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few, there's a famous sort of thought experiment by Philippa Foot. It's referred to as the trolley problem, and some of you may have heard of it. Basically, so the trolley problem is essentially this. There's a railroad line or track, and it's split into two. It's at a junction, and on one half of it is 3 people, on the other half is only 1 person. Now, and of course there's this trolley that's hurtling down the track towards the 3 people, and it will crush them and kill them. But you are in a position to throw a switch and divert the trolley so it only kills 1 person. Most people say that they would do this. That they say that they would, in fact, throw the switch, and just have it kill the 1 person. Because, you know, whole cost-benefit analysis thing. Needs of the many. So, though when given essentially the same problem, but they can push someone, they're sort of standing on a high footbridge overlooking the tracks, and next to them is a very large man who they can push off to his death, and the trolley will stop that way. Well, most people say that they wouldn't. Then most people say that they wouldn't do it, even though it's functionally the exact same scenario, which is interesting. So, from a purely utilitarian standpoint, that would be the correct answer. Now, okay, now utilitarianism is generally associated with using a very sort of rational, logistical framework to count to calculate the best ways of reducing suffering to the lowest possible level and increasing the maximum amount of happiness in the world. Its founding thinker was Jeremy Bentham. John Stuart Mill is also a very influential figure within the philosophy, and he's the one who sort of came up with the idea of the greatest good for the greatest number. Now, there's a problem with strict utilitarianism in that if you're going to bear that out to its logical extreme, that sort of leads to a situation where you can set about slicing someone up and taking their organs and giving those organs to 5 other people who are in need of those organs, because you've technically created more total happiness in the world. So given that, does morality come from an overall state of the world, or from the virtue of a person? Well, Philippa Foot was sort of a proponent of the idea that morality does come from the specific virtue of a person, and not how the world is at any one time. And between those two extremes, I think the answer is very clear which one is the right choice. The answer is yes. No, it is a very, very complicated issue. And to be fair, the ideas of philosophers are always more complex and more nuanced than they're sort of distilled down to. And I think that pretty much all of these people acknowledged that there's going to be sort of gray areas that we'll have to work around. So given how open to interpretation this debate over morality is, can we say for sure whether or not Joel did the right thing? Is there some sort of problem with asserting a universal morality? Is there such a thing as universal morality? And the answer, from my perspective, is yes and no. No, in the sense that morality, to some extent, is going to be dependent upon the situation, and it's going to be subjective based upon the people involved in the situation. Such like Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, which stated that you should act as if your actions could be transferred into a universal law. Well, the problem evidently is that not everyone thinks like you, and if you're going to say that, then that sort of gives you the option to say people who are not acting like you are acting immorally and they need to be corrected or punished. So I think it is somewhat open to interpretation. However, I think there's also a problem with saying that morality can't be measured in any objective sense whatsoever. And the reason I say that is because on some level, our moral decisions are based upon facts and assumptions about the physical world. And this is a point that Sam Harris makes in his book, The Moral Landscape. But notice, for instance, that we're not as concerned with how we treat insects, or plants, or rocks, as we are with how we treat our fellow human beings and higher mammals. Because we know, science tells us that insects and plants, and certainly rocks, are not conscious to the same degree that we are. They do not have the full range of experiences that we do. They cannot truly suffer in the same way that we can suffer. And beyond that, an empirical understanding of the world tells us that there are actions which are simply senseless and needlessly wasteful and violent. For instance, burning witches at the stake. That's something that used to happen hundreds of years ago. Today, of course, we don't believe in witches anymore. Science tells us that there aren't any. And so we recognize quite clearly that it is an unnecessary evil. It inflicts unnecessary harm upon people. Furthermore, I would argue that, for all our differences, humanity does share at least some common moral concepts, due to how similar all of our brains are. Every person has the capacity to suffer, and the capacity for happiness. And those emotions are experienced the same in the same brain regions of every person alive. So we can know for a fact that something is likely to cause more suffering. That a certain economic policy is going to cause more suffering than it will happiness, and therefore it would be an immoral policy to enact. I think that there will definitely always be gray areas within situations. I'm not sure that we will ever be able to say 100%. I'm not saying that science will have every answer to every moral question. However, I do think that there are general moral principles we can follow and abide by that will serve us well in many, if not most, situations. I think the way many people think about morality is that if you have a moral principle, it must admit of no exception. It has to be 100% consistent and true all the time to have any merit. But this is simply something we do not ask of principles in any other field or topic we interface with. Take food, for example. There are so many different possible diets that constitute a healthy diet. There are some general principles we should follow to have a healthy diet. Stay away from too much sugar and too much fat. But it would be insane for someone to tell you that there is only one way to eat, that there's only a certain number of foods at the grocery store that you can eat and still be healthy. Notice that the concept is open to personal... Notice the fact that the concept is open to personal interpretation does not make it vacuous or meaningless. Because as open to interpretation as it is, there is a distinction between food and poison. No one would say to you that eating rat poison is a healthy food choice. So yes, I think there will inevitably be moral gray areas. But we can still operate on solid moral principles. Just like the fact that what Joel had done may have been motivated out of love. He may have thought he was doing the right thing, but he can still be wrong, in my opinion. Did he do the right thing? In my opinion, no. He robbed Ellie of her agency, and make a sacrifice that she believed was... He deprived Ellie of the chance to choose for herself, and make a sacrifice that could have benefited an enormous amount of people. And that's the biggest problem I have with Joel's character. I mean, other than all the fireflies he murdered, you know, But no, in the end, I think we need to understand that people cannot be expected to be 100% moral all the time. That we're going to make errors and mistakes. All we can do is try and be understanding and forgiving of one another, and try our best to abide by basic moral principles. Or, in the words of Wil Wheaton, don't be a dick. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.